Mali, Burkina Faso, all those three West African countries have opted to leave or exit the ECOWAS. That is the bloc that stands for the Economic Community of West African States. Now, this comes in as a period wherein I think for the Pan-Africanists, they will question the integration process of the African continent. But nonetheless, joining me to discuss this very intriguing and interesting conversation of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso exodus from ECOWAS, it's a panel of distinguished ladies and gentlemen who will help us unpack the conversation and put perspective into it. Otherwise, I'll just quickly let them introduce themselves. My name is Douglas Drake. I am your host or moderator for tonight's conversation. I'll begin right from my immediate right until to my extreme right-hand side. Gentlemen, you're most welcome. Kindly say hello and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Seeti, a Pan-Africanist and a student of Uganda Christian University. I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to have you here, Mr. Mark. We're very looking forward to having an interesting conversation with you on this very intriguing conversation. The lady who has appeared on this show with numerous titles, but definitely she will know which one to pick today and for the occasion, and say hello to the viewers. You're most welcome.
All right, thank you, Drake. My name is Denise Ayebare, and as usual, I'm just an African holding a Ugandan passport. Pan-Africanism is in my blood. Yeah.
Thank you. We have heard it from the lady there. Today she's a Pan-Africanist. Definitely. Mr. Rodney, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Comrade Drake, for having me on this show. I am also grateful for the platform to make my maiden appearance on Civic Space TV, a platform that I've for so long desired to be a part of. I can confidently now say that it is a dream come true. My name is Adroni Rodney, a student of Makerere University pursuing a bachelor's degree in quantity surveying, and as well as student leader, having had the prerogative to serve as the Minister for Environment. I am a Pan-Africanist, and I'm also enthusiastic about youth activism, and I look forward to a wonderful discussion.
Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Looks like the panel has citizens who are intrigued with the term Pan-Africanism, but nonetheless, we shall get to that. But Rodney, very happy to have you here, and very thrilled to and looking forward to having an interesting conversation with you. Just a quick overview and background to this conversation. A few weeks ago, the president of Burkina Faso went ahead and in a press conference announced that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso were exiting the ECOWAS. That is a bloc that puts together over 15 West African countries. This comes at a point in time whereby we are having conversations of integration, but unfortunately we are seeing that happening in the West African countries. This follows, or this is from a background where we see a pattern that runs through all these countries. All of them had a coup from the years 2020, 2022, and 2023. Now, could that be a different, or could that also inform our conversation today? But nonetheless, I'll start with you, Denise, since they said ladies first, right? And a few days ago, we just had Valentine's Day, so we shall definitely, it's Thursday, so we'll definitely, just had it yesterday. So, Denise, let's just start the conversation. Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. For the viewers out there who are maybe trying to put their heads around this exit, or how it came about, kindly give them a background on how this comes into play and why it's important for us to have this conversation.
All right, thank you so much. So I think for far too long, let's say in 1884, on one of the Saturdays morning, probably most of the Africans woke up to breakfast, whereas most of the European powers in Berlin woke up to think how African countries were going to live, how they were going to think, and what their lives were going to be after them. And for far too long, it has been predominantly seen in the ways of which African countries are, in which the colonial masters, whether it is thinking economically, politically, socially, and on a psychology level, they determined how Africa is going to look like. Even it can be seen in the child mortality rates, where you're going to have children in minds of developed countries trying to struggle and strive to make sure that they hustle and make sure that capitalism within the developed countries is going on. But the reality for West African countries, and mostly the French colonies, has been that ever since independence, they still get to pay France a certain amount of money, because 85% of their annual GDP within the 14 former colonies of France, that's Berlin, that is Benin, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Central African Republic, or you're going to mention Togo and Senegal, all those countries, the 14 of them, still pay a certain amount of their annual GDP to France, which means that colonization could have stopped, but the economic colonization of France did not stop. Niger is the 4th producing country of uranium in the world, but the poorest. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have the most resources in the world, we could say, minus Congo. But these are the poorest countries that exist in the world, meaning that the resources they have do not directly benefit the citizens, but only enhance France. France itself doesn't have any mineral. It doesn't, but it has most of the money, most of the resources that come from West African countries. And if you're to look at it further, you're going to see that these countries for far too long have required self-determination. They have wanted to benefit from their own resources. And this is why you had coups in 2020, 2021, and 2023. Because they explicitly came out, the juntas, and said that our resources, we are not benefiting from them. France has continuously marginalized us. Our citizens do not have anything that they're benefiting from. Our GDPs, our standards of living, or even any hope that exists for us to develop does not exist. So the juntas came up and said, we need to put an end to this. We need to have some hope within the sea of landlocked hopelessness. And they said, you know what? If getting our resources, utilizing our money, making sure that the standards of living of our citizens are upheld, then if it means coups, we're going to pursue those coups. And that explains the military coups that we had in the past 3 years. But then going forward, then with the exit of ECOWAS, after the coups, what happened is that ECOWAS, as a regional integration where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger subscribed, was the first to say, we're going to impose sanctions on you. Because in Niger, we need you to put back President Mohamed, who was the president, back into power. And if you cannot, we're going to cut off the power supply. The power supply, 90% comes from Nigeria. If you cut off 90%, meaning hospitals, schools, or any business as usual in Niger is sort of halted. And I think you understand how much electricity, you cannot have anything going on if your phone is shut down or anything, given that everything is done online. But into the industries within the country, they're going to lack a certain level of productivity and efficiency. The sanctions that were put there were sort of dehumanizing. And these 3 countries thought that, you know what, since we're part of ECOWAS, maybe we are supposed to subscribe, they're supposed to sort of have our interests at heart. But that was the opposite. So the sanctions that were put on these countries were not affecting the junta. It was directly affecting the populations of those countries. But I don't think we need to romanticize coups within Africa or anything. But I think now, where we talk about Pan-Africanism, where we talk about Africa determining itself, where we talk about Africa having its own resources for its own people and having its people develop economically or politically and socially, I think then if it requires a coup for us to achieve that, then I think this is the precedence that these 3 countries are setting. The exit from ECOWAS comes directly saying that these countries are backed up by France. The regional integration, the regional bloc, is backed up by France. And it is the same France they are running away from. It's the same France that has continuously marginalized them, curtailed them of any betterment that they sort of want to deal away with. And if it continues to meddle itself in the affairs of ECOWAS, then the 3 juntas feel that they do not have any reason to still be part of the oppressor. Because things like national security are threatened, because you could have spies within these countries going in. You could have a lot of what is not in the interest of these countries coming from ECOWAS, because their justification is it is France-backed, and besides that, all the French troops withdraw within these 3 countries, proves that the 3 countries require self-determination, they require to use their resources, and I think it is a start, or it is a hope for all the other African countries to have the self-determination that for far too long our ancestors, the Kwame Nkrumah or Abdel Nasser, have continuously talked about.
Perfect. Mark,
Yes.
Just to hear from Denise has given us a very interesting and detailed background to this conversation. And I want us to start the conversation from the perspective of neocolonialism. That the bloc of ECOWAS could ideally symbolize or depict post-colonial Africa, but in its own self have the intrigue of neocolonialism. Because the arguments of those three states of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali is that ECOWAS does not have the spirit of the African person. So let us start the conversation from there. Is ECOWAS justified in putting sanctions onto those African states? If yes, why? If no, why?
I believe ECOWAS is justified to put sanctions on these states because, first of all, they left the bloc using military means. So you cannot legitimize governments that have taken over power through coups. And I will start the argument by saying that the genitalia of a drunken man or a drunken woman does not belong to them. It becomes a playfield of anybody who is sober. Rape cases have occurred between male and female when the mental faculties have been tampered with in terms of consciousness. And unfortunately, many people would rather remain in permanent intoxication without realizing that their genitalia is being messed up with. I'm talking at a highly political level. That in the drunkenness of our politics, we have forgotten the value that hangs between our legs. How then can we get control over the land that we step on when we don't control the land in between our two ears? Vaccinations, birth control pills, immunization programs, all that is a Middleland battle that the West is cashing in on us as Africans. So literally speaking, as we speak right now, someone has an interest in the land that hangs between your legs. It's really very difficult, therefore, for African countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to have control over the land that they step on when they don't control their mental faculties in terms of consciousness. So to answer your question, I believe we need to do away with that person that has interest in the land. I'll call that person a snake. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Because generally I believe that these coups are engineered from outside the continent.
Really?
Yes.
If you talk about the coups being engineered from outside the continent, Mali, not even Mali, Burkina Faso, which has just had a recent coup happening in its country, the junta, who is I think called Boubacar, who is a junta that ousted out the president of Burkina Faso, holds the idea that they need to own their resources, holds the idea that they need to own their land but also make decisions in the best interest of the people. So does that then say that these coups, because the interest of the people does not represent the interest of the so-called colonizers then? So are they the ones who are really funding this, or we have people rising in Africa that are pushing out an idea that is entirely pro-African?
Well, I think time will tell, because you really can't judge someone who has taken over power a few days ago. I'll call it a few days ago. He's been in power for a very short time. And yeah, time will tell generally. Because one thing you realize is that once these so-called revolutionaries take over power by military coups, they end up disorganizing the population through corruption tendencies and things like that. So I really believe that we need to give it time to see what they can do for the continent. Okay. But I'm still positive that at times these coups are engineered from outside to destabilize the continent. I'm a believer in Kwame Nkrumah's vision of an integrated Africa, United States of Africa. And I believe that when states like Burkina Faso and Mali leave regional blocks like ECOWAS, it takes us a step backward, and we cannot see the vision of an integrated Africa coming to life, coming to reality. Because remember, if we want to integrate as Africa, it starts with regional blocks. East African Community, ECOWAS, and many others. And then once those blocks are stabilized, then I believe that the continental...
There's a possibility of integration.
Definitely, there's a possibility of integration. But then, once there are military coups taking part in most of these African states, then it takes us backward.
Okay.
Yes.
Denise, I see you want to add something before I just get to Rodney quickly.
Yeah, so I think, like I just said, it would not be okay to romanticize coups within African continent, because we as Africans know the cost of the coups. When you look at the strong men probably in khakis, you look at the political and social strifes, you look at the structure adjustment problems that come with it, I don't think it would be okay to romanticize coups. But I don't think it is also equally right to romanticize sham democracies, to romanticize cosmetic elections, because it's usually the same cost, just that these other men probably are in suits rather than the khakis. You're probably going to have the political and social strifes. You're probably going to have the structural adjustment problems just under a flashy new name. So I think as we don't want to romanticize coups, we also don't want to romanticize fallen democracies. We don't want to romanticize the shackles of what these individuals are going through, how their resources are being squandered. The kind of living that they're going through can't also be romanticized under the entire flashy name of democracy, which has continuously failed to work, just like the corruption issues or anything. And on that point where Mark talks about it is too early to judge probably a book by its cover, I think still Burkina Faso is creating probably a better Burkina Faso for these individuals. Because if you look at the industries, how they have continuously now made their industries homemade, or how they have localized their industries. I think of recent, like 2 weeks back, the junta announced that they are going to continuously manufacture their own gold residues, meaning they're no longer going to have them exported for other countries to do what, to have the finished products. You look at how they have continuously localized the economy. The individuals are getting jobs and everything. And I think this is the dream that every African has, to wake up to be able to work in their own country rather than going to probably to Saudi or Qatar, where they're going to continuously be battered, human rights abused, or any kind of dehumanization and modern slavery that comes with an individual living. When you look at how many bodies are usually found on the on the Mediterranean, of Africans trying to cross to find a better life, a better living within European countries, you see that this is not something we subscribe to. Colonialism didn't end because whites or the colonies, the Brits or the French wanted it to end. It ended because the cost of maintaining it became expensive. The cost of making sure that the rebellions no longer occur became expensive. I don't think at one point they ended colonialism because they wanted to give it to us. No, the cost of fighting, because there were many rebellions that had occurred, even before, whether you look at the Maji Rebellion or you look at the Mau Mau Rebellion, Nyambinji Rebellion. These were rebellions that were suppressed over time and over time. But the cost of maintaining the colonialism became expensive. We didn't get independence just because one Frenchman woke up and said that, you know what, now we're going to grant you independence. They looked at the pros and cons of what was happening. So I don't think we need to say that democracy needs to be upheld at a point in time that democracy does not benefit the people. Because if it's for the people and by the people and it's not working for them, then I think other means are justified.
All right, Rodney. Denise mentions that democracies, according to Abraham Lincoln, is for the people, government of the people, for the people, by the people. The interests of the people of Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso, others argue, or critics argue, that right now it is critically being seen through the juntas that have taken over those 3 states. And they are rubbishing or putting aside any remains of the colonizers of those 3 states. Now, that being said, the interest of the people of Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso are symbolized in those three juntas, who at the moment are very good friends and allies that are trying to uplift and develop their countries. However, the bloc of ECOWAS that looks at representing the interest of those states in the Sahel region seem to suggest otherwise, that you know what, you are abusing the principles of democracy, you are not only abusing the principles of democracy, but also you are destabilizing the states. Yet the citizens in those countries feel otherwise. Now let us pick up the conversation from, I still want to comment about the neo-colonialism that we have in the Sahel region, but then now we start the conversation of why is it important that these countries left ECOWAS? Is it pro-integration or it's against the idea of integration? Because from where I sit, these three countries seem to be working together already and fronting a view of integration.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Drake, for that question. Now, Africa as a continent has been known for its high prevalence of coup d'etats. And I remember some few weeks back when you had a similar discussion as such, where you discussed that second to Africa is only Latin America with the most number of coup d'etats. So in Africa, we look at democracy as something that could not be delivering as expected. That is why we are seeing coups in West Africa, and there arises the question of whether coup d'etats can actually deliver the desired change that we want. Dating back from the post-colonial era in Africa in the early 1950s, we see that our founding fathers, or the African leaders by then, saw the need to sort of bring our nations together for a common cause. Yeah, and in that case, we saw the ideology of Pan-Africanism. We saw the ideology of activism among the different states. And looking at what recently happened in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, actually represents the will by the African people to actually claim what is theirs. However, just like my fellow panelist mentioned, that much as we may not need to romanticize democracy that is not appropriate, like she said, I think it is important for us to look at the effects of these military coups on the local population. Yeah, because, for example, I think it is also important to discuss why these countries actually left ECOWAS. One would argue that the reason why these countries left the regional economic integration was basically because of the sanctions that had been imposed. The sanctions ranging from financial limitations, where financial transactions were denied from countries like Niger. We also had sanctions like the one-week ultimatum that was given to these countries to restore justice and constitutional order. So one would argue that these countries leaving this bloc was actually an assessment of whether staying in the regional economic integration was actually beneficial. I believe that these sanctions had a lot to do with the assessment of the alliance of the Sahel states, which is Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, in regard to reasons why they left. However, I believe that it is important as African states, as African countries, to first of all reclaim what is ours. Because much as we claim to have independence in most of the African states, most of the affairs of these countries continue to be interfered with by foreign powers. So I want to also believe that when we are discussing democracy, it is important for us, first of all, to ensure that as we are carrying out democracy, as we are having elections to democratically elect leaders, it is important for us also to so much detach ourselves from foreign influence to be able to fully exploit all our resources, to be able to fully achieve self-sustainability as a continent.
All right. Denise, we have answered the question of why these countries have left ECOWAS. And in answering the question, we all the panelists bring out the idea that one, they felt ECOWAS imposed sanctions on them, but also the reason as to why ECOWAS, its sole reason of existence, is to promote economic trade, integration, etc., of which the three countries feel they have failed on that point. But also the most important thing is the influence, the foreign influence that ECOWAS gets at the moment, that later on it affects those three countries, is something that those three juntas feel their countries shouldn't be abiding to such. Now, as we progress from the why did they leave, let us now take the conversation to the integration part. What this means for the African continent, for the Sahel region, East Africa, and the continent as a whole. You mentioned the philosophy of Pan-Africanism that was brought out by the founding fathers of Tanzania in Julius Nyerere, Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, among others. So in your discussion, I would like you to first bring forward what this vision of Pan-Africanism is. But then now we take the conversation to what this means to integration, specifically economic integration.
All right, thank you so much. What Africa needs are allies and collaborators and not dominators. So when you look at what Pan-Africanism necessarily means and what it meant from our forefathers, it meant that politically, socially, and economically, we are free from any sort of colonial rule or any other foreign influence that is out there. That Africa is able to determine itself, is able to use its resources, it's able to develop its citizens with its own resources, and it's able to develop economically and have strong political structures that are able to sustain it. Now, fast forward, what we see is that whether it is the East African community, whether it is the ECOWAS, whether it is SADC, or even the African Union, these countries still have low bargaining power. These countries, or even regional integrations and regional blocs, still have prevalent foreign influence that exists, whether it's by foreign influence or by former colonial masters. And what happens in the Sahel is actually totally different. Like I told you, France benefits 85% from its former colonies from their annual income. What it means is that these countries now again borrow from the French central bank their own money. And you cannot borrow more than 20%. If you borrow more than 20%, it has to be vetoed. They're discussing your own income that you've given to a country that has developed itself, and for you, you're again getting it in form of loans, in form of debts. So you find that most of the African countries are highly indebted. But to the Sahel region and the ECOWAS, first of all, they tried the diplomatic means, and they gave them sanctions, and they gave them an ultimatum to make sure that, you know what, by a week, you should have restated the presidents that you overthrew. The juntas say that we're not going to do this, corruption, our citizens were not benefiting. And actually, these coups were celebrated. Unlike other coups that we have had in the past, I think these coups are different from what we have had. Because if you look at Burkina Faso, and if any has read about Thomas Sankara, you see that the same spirit that he had for Burkina Faso, it's the same spirit that is rejuvenated. And I think these were his words. You could kill me, but you can't kill the spirit that is within the African people. And I think these were the same words of Patrice Lumumba of Congo when he was being hanged. So you find that the spirit of Pan-Africanism did not die with our forefathers. It's actually being seen in the present. It is being rejuvenated. It is being celebrated within the current generation that we are having. Because these are individuals that have realized no matter what Africa does, it needs to develop economically. And for it to develop economically, it needs to take over control of its own resources. Because even though we are to have another World War III, the World War III would probably be an energy war, because you find that the resources that Central Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, all the countries that have most of the resources are within the African continent. So you find that Africa would be at the center of that war. So what does that mean? So when they are going to carry out and make sure that they are going to use military means to make sure that they attack these countries, I think Algeria, which is not part of ECOWAS, said that they cannot attack another neighbor because they share a 1,000-kilometer border with Niger. So there is no way they are going to invade a country. So they say that in anything you do, you have to try diplomatic means, because whatever is happening, the humanitarian crisis in West Africa is already wanting. So if we carry out military attacks or military intervention, it's going to be problematic for what is happening already. So fast forward, what it means for the integration. You see, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are key players within the ECOWAS. Burkina Faso has gold, Niger has uranium, Mali has gold. And these economies, even when they are poor, they sort of benefit the other African countries within the ECOWAS. So you're going to find that the grouping of 15 countries, these are allies that they need. These are countries that they need. But then the resources that they need from them, the citizens are not benefiting. And I don't think that is what Pan-Africanism says. Pan-Africanism says you're able to determine yourself. You're able to carry out self-defense when necessary. You're able to make sure that your citizens develop. And you're able to make sure that there is an integration that is formed on the same ideology. So when you look at the ideological differences that exist within the ECOWAS, for example, being funded by France, and even France backing up their sanctions, you find that is not the same ideology that these countries share together with what the other 13 countries in the ECOWAS would share with them. So on economic integration, it would be very detrimental for the ECOWAS, because these are key players. And without them, these countries have a total of 117 million population. This is a populace that ECOWAS could benefit from. But secondly, they're minerals. But if these minerals are not benefiting the citizens, then why should they be in the ECOWAS? Because they're not the resources. It's an economic integration. But these are the poorest countries among the poorest countries in the world. So if they're not able to harness their resources and develop, there is no need to stay in ECOWAS, because a regional integration, a regional bloc, is supposed to share your same ideologies, supposed to have the same objectives, and supposed to make sure that all the aims are achieved for each and the other country. If it's only benefiting the leaders and not the citizens, then I think there is a certain justification to that. But then the second thing is that, like how we are trying to interrogate the effects on the populace, what kind of effects the military coup has on the populace. I would argue and say that the same effects the military coup has, it's the same effects that actually the democracy, the sham democracies that they had. Because we had the terrorist attacks. And the juntas said that these terrorist attacks were usually fueled by the French troops that were existing in the country. When Burkina Faso and Niger expelled all the French troops, the justification to the president of France, the French president, was that, you know what? The French troops have continuously fueled violence, have continuously fueled any form of peace within these countries. What we need are not terrorist attacks. What we need is not the Islamic extremism. We think that with the French troops existing, we have had a lot of proxy wars that have continuously killed people. And you see, ever since the coup took place, I think they have subdued, because the juntas have gone into alliance with the Wagner BRICS, because their justification is that Russia does not inherently go into our internal affairs. They're able to stick to the agreements that we have, and their own benefits is that if they're able to benefit economically, there is nothing that they want from your internal affairs. So you see that their justification is, with the French troops existing within these countries, it becomes worse. And what happens is that those are the democracies causing the kind of humanitarian crisis that you have. But if you have BRICS or Russia or the Wagner Group existing within the countries, they're able to keep a certain level of peace that these people have not known of. The kind of violence or Islamic extremism is sort of subdued as compared to the other side. So any country that does not benefit from a bloc is justified to leave. And this is something that you could run a comparative with Brexit. Why Britain left the EU, because they felt they weren't benefiting, or they were harboring a lot of immigrants, and this was acting as was acting as a force on their own economy. So you see that these are things that are justified. It just depends on what the benefits that these countries need to get. If the harms outweigh the benefits, then any country is justified to leave that bloc because it's not benefiting it, whether politically, socially, and economically. Yeah.
All right. Mark.
Yes.
Denise makes very wonderful submissions. And what I'm really interested in is the ideological differences. ECOWAS seems to depict an ideology that is more colonial-centered, in that they represent the interests of foreigners who do not depict actually the interest of the citizens. And the juntas, from her submission, seem to depict what the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali stand for. Now, from that point, if these three juntas represent an idea that has the Pan-Africanist centered ideas, then definitely that will have an effect on the African continent, because eyes are on those three countries and eyes are watching on how they're conducting their business. Now, that alone will also spark debate, just like we're having one right now in our minds, to talk about this and see how actually possible we can have regional integration. Now, in your submission, I'd like you to capture this from an East African perspective and take us through. East Africa has also very, very complicated and sophisticated ideological differences. Should we, how best can we have an integrated Africa economically? Because that seems to be the first starting point for us to have an integrated Africa. So look at the ideological differences and how we can maybe tackle it, and then bring in the face of East Africa.
Well, in regards to East Africa, I'll start off by reminding you of the recent scenario that happened between Kenya and Uganda. Kenya refused to take our sugar due to the quality. And I believe that they had a right to do that. Because before you start trading with your neighbors, you have to look out for quality. Okay? So if you're giving me something that is not of the standard that I want, I believe you shouldn't bring up the issues of integration at that point. So therefore, if we are to integrate as a community, we need to also work on the quality of the goods we have. Yeah, that's at the part of Uganda and Kenya. But the regional blocks are really important. And I'll give you the example of the Congo fracas, the Congo wars, the M23 rebels destabilizing Congo. Congo brought in is it SADC forces, the South Africa and what? And the strength of the M23 rebels was subdued. But when the forces went away, I think you see what's happening in Congo. Even yesterday, news started making rounds when villagers were running away from their villages. So this goes to show the importance of regional integration. So when I see countries like Mali, Burkina Faso getting out, and Niger getting out from regional blocks like ECOWAS, I feel that it destabilizes the security within the region.
But Mark,
yes.
I seem to pose or hold a different view that even the ECOWAS in its own self has failed to maintain peace in those West African countries. ECOWAS itself, Senegal, a few days ago, the president went ahead and said he has suspended elections. And what has ECOWAS done? They're mute on the matter. So how shall we then speak to the effectiveness of a body that keeps quiet on very important issues but only rises on matters that seem to tackle sovereignty of states?
Well, I think your issue goes to do with the issue of political fragmentation. You realize that right now, the coup leaders are holding their own group, and then the presidents that I could call legitimate, elected presidents, are also holding their own group. And that's what bringing about the division in countries. But yeah, that's something that will destabilize us into reaching our goal of a united continent. But generally, I'll stick to my point and say that I'm not in support of these coups. Even if they have points in regards to chasing away the Europeans, the West, colonialism. I feel that it's not at heart. And as I said at the beginning, time is going to tell. In political science, they say a good government must be close to its people. But you find that at the beginning, people are excited, people go on the streets and celebrate when a coup has happened. Oh, this is our savior. But when you give it time, you realize that the same people are the ones putting their people down, are the ones destabilizing the continent. And then if you feel that these coups are important and you're saying, yes, you're promoting coups in West and West Africa, then I believe it's going to bring more coups into the picture. Because remember, the people that these people overthrew also start planning to get power. In political science, they say political power is like a blanket. You feel the coldness when it is removed from you. So all these people that they've overthrown tend to feel the coldness, that vacuum of political power living.
So that means it's going to be a constant circle.
They're
Definitely.
actually under house arrest.
But
Yes.
But being under house arrest also means they could possibly have connections outside that could bring.
And you see, the thing with that kind of thing is that that's where the West interferes with our what? With our activities, our politics. Because these people who are feeling the vacuum of political power leaving them,
They use that chance.
they use that chance to coordinate with what? The people outside the continent who have what?
And that's the reason
that is why
actually
they're
they're leaving
exiting.
ECOWAS, because they feel it is a threat to their national security.
So
Or
generally,
they
I
could be
think
able
it's
to
a
have
cycle.
spies
Mm.
within the same African countries.
You heard of, I heard that the Mali coup leader, what's his name again? Is he, I'm forgetting his name. I heard that he was trained actually by the West.
Actually, it's Russian forces.
Russian forces trained
Yes.
him. So that goes to say that, do you want to tell me that if he was trained by the Russian forces, the Russians won't have political influence?
No,
won't
no,
tell them what to
but
do?
historically, Russia is a country that has had very minimal intervention with state sovereignty. Unlike the Western world that has its claws entrenched in systems of states, Russia, on the other hand, have not seen any incidents where they have gone ahead and coerced decisions of states. So it's very unlikely that it's going to start today. But nonetheless, those are your opinions, and I hope Russia doesn't do the same. But thanks very much for those submissions. Rodney, the conversation is taking toll on what this means for integration. Denise and Mark do us justice in trying to demystify what that means for economic integration. But I'd like us to continue taking the conversation further and understanding it now from the perspective of a young person. We are here energetic and excited to have conversations still on economic integration because we believe once we have an integrated Africa, there are possibilities of exchange of technology, the possibilities of free movement of trade of goods from one border to the other without having to go through a lot of bureaucracy or red tape. Now, that being the case, the possibility that fronts for the young person seems to give us or paint for us a picture that there are endless possibilities for the African young person, of which our continent is endowed and lucky enough to have almost the youngest continent in the world. Now, what does, first of all, in its own self, when we see countries like the ones we're talking about here in tonight's discussion, exiting a body that they believe front an ideology that is not pro-African. So what does that, first of all, mean for the young African? But then, two, in terms of economic integration, does that then give us maybe a ray of hope? Because we see Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger seem to already have a working relationship in regards to how they're going to exploit their resources and how they're going to work.
Once again, thank you so much. Now, I believe that disintegration in West Africa presents both challenges and opportunities. In regards to opportunities, we could see that there is going to be an increase in the utilization of its natural resources. And we are looking at possible creation of employment opportunities for hundreds of thousands of people within these these states. However, when we are to delve deeper into the intricacies and the complexities of the disintegration, we realize that the exit has far more reaching effects on the youth, the young person, that the canile, the lot of the canile within these countries. So I, for one, believe that one, we are going to have a disorganization within existing economic agreements, within existing trade agreements, at both bilateral and multilateral level. A case in point is recently she hinted about it when one of the sanctions that were imposed on Niger by Nigeria was actually to cut off power supply. And you realize that more than 70% of the electricity that is exported to Niger comes from Nigeria. And about, I think, 3 weeks ago, we have been experiencing a series of power cuts within the capital of Niger, and the cutting off of this electricity is expected to worsen the situation. So we are seeing that what do you think of the common businessman within this area, people that are surviving, people's businesses that are thriving or that are surviving on this electricity? With sanctions as such imposed, we are seeing the situation aggravating even more. But then looking on the side of opportunities, because when the 3 countries came together and formed the alliance of the Sahel states, we are possibly looking at achieving a monetary union. I think they are propounding a currency known as the Sahel. So I believe that this in its own sense is an opportunity towards achieving the greater progressive agenda of self-sustainability. And I also want to mention that when we delve deeper into the far-reaching effects of this exodus of these 3 countries, we realize that we could bring in a question of food security. How? As I was reading an article in African News, I got to discover that actually most of these countries, given their status of being landlocked, have actually been heavily dependent on their neighbors in the south. So their symbiotic relationship between the alliance of the Sahel states and the coastal states actually depends so much on competitive advantage. What do I gain and what do I give? And if you are to look at this question of food security, you realize that countries within the Sahel, the 3 countries that are leaving the bloc, actually have structural shortfalls in the supply of grain. And I think Niger has been benefiting so much from import trade, where they have been able to import most of the foodstuffs. And you realize that with them leaving and the sanctions that have been imposed on them, we're likely to see them suffering in a way to access the international markets. And you realize that without having a good working relationship with their neighbors in the south, you discover that it is going to be very hard for them to access preferential markets in other parts of the Africa and the world in general. So I, for one, believe that whereas ECOWAS does not entirely represent the interests of the common Africans, the people within these countries, it is worth investing efforts towards preventing further disintegration of other regional economic blocs, because it in its own sense is a hindrance to the progressive agenda towards achieving a fully integrated Africa. And if we are to look at the impacts on the economy, because recently I think the Islamic Finance Corporation held a series of agreements with countries like Burkina Faso, countries like Cote d'Ivoire that subscribed to the ECOWAS, and you realize that these agreements were, I think, worth 1.2 billion. But what is the fate of these agreements with continuity in political instability, with continuity in the disintegration of these regional blocks? So I believe that whereas it presents challenges, it also presents opportunities, and it is important for us to look at both sides. For the common youth, for the energetic youth, I believe that with further exploitation in resources, with further optimization of resources within this country, we are likely to see opportunities presented to the youth in terms of employment creation. We are going to see industry, and it's also an opportunity for these countries to sort of carry out a reconfiguration in the way that they run their economies. We could be seeing a situation whereby there is need for these countries now to develop infrastructure, because you realize that in order to utilize these resources optimally, you need to put into place certain things like infrastructure. You need to set up industries. You need to set up so many things that support these new developments. So that in its own sense will present opportunities for the young person from that particular perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are very interesting insights. Challenges and opportunities at the same time. Denise, I'm interested in the challenges. The challenge is that what my brother Rodney says, this will destabilize or disintegrate trade agreements that are in place. And that won't only affect trade in the region, but also affect trade internationally for those three states. And that alone would then mean that the poor person, the actual citizen in these countries are the ones that suffer. Not the people who front the ideas, because they will definitely have the privileges, but that lady in the streets of Niger, that lady in the streets of Burkina Faso or Mali, who are directly affected by electricity cuts, among others. So let us speak now. We are still talking about integration, what it means to the future of Africa. If ECOWAS as a body poses sanctions such as power cuts in such countries because they want that you put back the previous president into power and legitimize the government that was in place. This alone presents, in my opinion, presents a view that I think doesn't really reflect who we are, because we as Africa, we rely on the philosophy of the Ubuntu. I am because we are. If at all a country has its own sovereignty, if citizens, or if those coups happen and the citizens are okay with it, because they say democracy is the power of the people by the people. If the citizens are okay with it, unlike what Mark says, that let's give it time and see what happens. But I think in the short run, the citizens are happy. But let us just speak to the issue of the challenges this has on, first of all, the local person in those countries, but then also what this means for the relationship that it will have with the other West African countries.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, first and foremost, for any child or any young person or any adult that exists in any of these countries, to understand the cost of a sham democracy or to understand the cost of neocolonialism, you can ask any child in a rural school how they are beaten because they are not proficient in a language of the European powers or a colonial master. Yeah? Being beaten because you can't speak English. But then true, like I'd already said, a child who is working in the mines, probably in the uranium mines in Niger, probably in the gold mines, they're kind of child labor that exists just to benefit the other states. Or even, let's not go far, the cost of actually bleaching or using creams. These are things that we usually do not want to attribute to neocolonialism, and we usually say, what is Pan-Africanism? Pan-Africanism is embracing one's identity. It's an identity that every African out there would be proud of, even an African in the diaspora or an African of African decency. So you look at these things and you question what does it mean to these individuals. Because even of recent, I think Burkina Faso and Niger banned the speaking of French or even studying in French in any of these former colonies. So you look at what they are pioneering is Pan-Africanism, one's identity, recognizing that kind of identity, because without it, you wouldn't be probably complete.
But Denise, before we complete that point, let me just come in. You see, what Mark was trying to front, that we have these brilliant ideas, these leaders who come with a vision of the promised land, but a few years down the road, things we go back to...
Exactly. And this is why I say that the coups that have happened in West Africa are actually revolutionary. You cannot compare the current coups, probably the coup of 1979 of Obote II or anything of Amin Dada. We don't think that there are different metrics that these coups can be judged on. Or you cannot compare it with the coups probably in 1981 of Liberia or the coups in 1965 of Egypt or any of the other countries, Congo. The coups, the nature of the coups that now exist and what the other leaders did was, one, to build structures that actually benefit them. When you look at any of the other coups that took place post-independence, all those coups, whether it is in the Congo, whether it is Kwame Nkrumah being overthrown in 1966, or it is Obote being overthrown in 1971, all these coups, the kind of mechanisms that they had post was to continuously build structures that enrich these leaders into power. One, demolish the constitution. Two, make sure that these structures continuously work for you. Use decrease instead of any of the other that is existing. When you look at Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the kind of structures or the first things that they have undertaken is economic development, benefit the citizens, localize industries, make sure that most of the individuals are employed in those countries, harness your own resources, know things like carry out import substitution that is going to exist. Because the first thing that they realized is that for any African country to develop, it must take control of its own money and its own resources. So noticing what happens post the coup with any of the other coups that we could use in comparison, you notice the differences and you see that most of these individuals are benefiting from that. But then going to the challenges, I just want to run a comparative here. When sanctions from the EU were imposed on Russia, and they said that during the Russia-Ukrainian war, you're not supposed to trade with Russia. Notice that Russia has wheat, Russia has oil pipelines or anything. The first countries that were actually purchasing wheat from Russia were European countries. Why? Because they noticed that the trade-off of the sanctions or what they're going to benefit is their citizens to benefit. The social contract says, even when the juntas are not following it, the first thing you need to do is to serve the best interest of your citizens. If wheat prices are increasing in Europe or oil prices, they're going to make a trade-off. We don't care whatever sanctions the EU or the UN are imposing on these countries, as long as we can still trade with Russia. So why am I running that comparative? The trade-off that countries usually make is not probably in form of what ECOWAS wants or what the EU wants or what the UN wants, is where the citizens are going to benefit. Because I think that even when we talk about the challenges that are going to be faced, or even the other ECOWAS countries are going to face the same challenges. There are very many oil pipelines that actually pass through these countries. You could argue that the Niger-Chad oil pipeline, or you could argue that the Niger-Benin, or all these pipelines, the Trans-Saharan oil pipeline, which was sort of halted in 2019, all these pass through these countries, or they originate from these countries. So you look at the sanctions, or the challenges posed by the sanctions, or the multilateral agreements, or any of that. Countries are willing to trade off any of those agreements. Countries are willing to throw them under the bus and make sure that they still continue trading with these countries. Because what they benefit is more as compared to upholding the sanctions. So understanding the kind of trade-off you need to make is usually important. And this is what usually happens in any agreements or what. Countries usually side with where they're going to benefit the most. Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and any of their countries say that if you attack Niger, Algeria or any of the other countries said, if you attack Niger, it's an attack on us, all of us. So you look at, they are considering the benefits as compared to whether they do not agree with the multilateral agreements or the bilateral agreements that they have with these countries. The second thing is, the third thing and the last is, I wanted to talk about what it means for the Western powers or the other agreements they had. I mean, even before they exited the ECOWAS, most of the European countries or even the UN countries that subscribe to the UN had already left these countries. And even before they made the decision to leave ECOWAS, they were not trading with any other country. So they have proven that they can survive. And I don't think this is only happening to any of these West African countries. Uganda, of recent, is surviving without NGOs, without donations from many countries, even when we are facing the kind of financial problems. But this is proof that African countries can do without the West. Because US, UK, or even the EU countries are no longer a beacon of hope to Africa. They are actually perpetuating violence, harnessing the resources that are meant supposed to be for African countries. And I think for far too long, most of the African countries are now proving that they can do without them. What they need are not dominators, they're allies and collaborators. And if Russia is giving them that, BRICS is giving them that. For 5 years so far, Central African Republic has been having relations with Russia. And you see, this is a relationship that has been helping them with the kind of violence that they have within their countries. So they have realized it's no longer about any of the Western powers. And it's no longer about none of the Western powers. So they're able to harness any of the resources to determine themselves and actually be independent from any of the foreign influence. Yeah.
All right. Mark, I'll just quickly come to you as when you come back from the break, but maybe something you can contemplate about as we go for the break is way forward. How can we then have this possibility of integration even with scenarios where we have Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger exiting a bloc? But in them exiting a bloc, there seems to be an alliance in place among those three countries. So are we going to see more of African countries exiting their regional blocs and forming relations with countries, or should we opt for a country whereby people stay in these regional blocs and have an integrated Africa? Something you can ponder about as we come back for the break. Then we can maybe have a discussion on what is happening in DRC Congo, and then we can wrap up the conversation. Otherwise, for our viewers out there who have been watching, we've been discussing the mass exodus over Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from exodus and what this means for the future of integration in Africa. Joining me is Rodney, Denise, and Mark, who have, for now, given us a very wonderful discussion. Otherwise, see you shortly. Bye-bye.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from that break. Right before we went into the break, I had posed a question to Mark on something you can ponder about, and maybe I think it's the right time you give us your submission.
Yes, as we move forward, I will stand to my point that regional integration is the way to go.
But
These coups, actually right now, you find that people are celebrating, they're happy because they have a sigh of relief because the current dictatorship that has been making them suffer has been taken down. Little do they know that this is just something that is recurring. Okay? So I stand with the vision of our forefathers, people like Kwame Nkrumah, who envisioned a continent that is united. The goal is the United States of Africa. One country, one president, one currency, one foreign reserve, and one military. Okay?
Ask the visibility of that.
It sounds nice on paper.
It sounds nice on paper, and it is hard.
But is it possible to achieve it really?
It is possible.
How?
If we start with regional integration,
which is already failing.
Which is already failing, and that's why I stand to my point that these coups are taking us nowhere. Because once you encourage coups, it's going to just keep on happening and occurring. And the challenge with these coups is that it's detrimental to the economy of these countries in some way. My colleague mentioned that some of the countries are landlocked. How are they going to trade? They say if you're not on the table for deciding economy, then you're on the menu for eating. So our children are constantly going to be on the menu for eating if we don't realize that we actually need to put in the work. I'm happy with what is happening via the East African community. We've brought in new member states. Somalia came in recently, and it's been suffering with tribal conflicts and what. But I hope, since it joined the regional bloc, it will stabilize. And the stability that Somalia is enjoying right now, the somewhat small stability, because there is still instability in Somalia right now, but it's enjoying a little bit of stability because of the help of people like His Excellency, the President of Uganda, who contributed the UPDF to go and fight and stabilize the place. So it really shows you that once countries are united via regional blocks, it really helps to solve the issue of insecurity in the region. When I go back to Western Africa, Nigeria has suffered a lot with Boko Haram insurgencies. And the funny thing with these rebel outfits is that they normally take over places that are oil-rich or mineral-rich areas, okay? So do you literally think that these rebel outfits are not puppets of the West? They definitely could be puppets of the West. Because if the West sees that it's not gaining something from you, it will find all means possible to make sure that they gain. If it means causing instability, they will cause the instability. So I believe regional integration is the way forward, because once we federate as regions, then it's easier for us to come together and unite as Africans. Yes.
All right. Rodney, bodies like the African Union for such a long time has been criticized for, first of all, being mute on issues that directly affect the African continent. The body in the African Union should be the one responsible in trying to push this idea. And for far too long, they've been criticized for somewhat not doing enough. But as we move forward with this conversation, or as we transit to discuss the political instability and insecurity in DRC, I think it's very important that we start, or we conclude, reach towards the end of our conversation and bring in the aspect of African Union. How can the AU do what they must do in pushing the agenda of integration in Africa, but also uniting these regional blocks to, first of all, sing the same song? Because AU, as a body responsible for African countries, ought to play that motherly role in putting together these regional blocks. But we have seen quite often they have been mute on these issues. So how can they get more involved in these issues?
Once again, thank you so much. I believe that when we are discussing the issue of continental and regional integration and its implications on the same, it is important for us to discuss the implications on bodies like the African Union and, most importantly, Africa's agenda of 2063, the Africa we want. Now, the agenda is basically Africa's strategic framework to achieve inclusive and sustainable development by 2063. And we also look at this agenda as the Pan-African drive for unity. We look at this agenda as the Pan-African drive for progressive, collective progress and collective prosperity. Now, at the inception of this agenda, we see that our forefathers, or the African leaders by then, saw the need to refocus and to reprioritize Africa's agenda away from the apartheid that was taking place by then and the attainment of political independence. And they saw the need to shift, because ideally this was the agenda of the Organization of the African Unity, the precursor for the African Union. So now we saw a shift to now promote, we saw a shift in the agenda now to promote social and economic development within the African state, to attain peace and stability, and to also attain full regional and economic integration. Yes, now, and also to mention, and pertinent to note, is that the agenda of 2063 recognizes, much as it recognizes Africa's progressive agenda entirely, it also brings to light that it is important that in order to achieve full continental integration in the long term, we must first attain stability at regional level. And that is why when they were drafting this agenda, it took note, and it is actually comprising of national development plans of countries and the strategic plans of regions. So you realize that having all these plans, having all these strategic plans, and embedding them in this agenda was actually a move towards the integration that we are talking about. But now, almost 11 years down the road, a lot has happened. We are seeing destability or disintegration in blocks like ECOWAS, and one would argue that really this is rather a threat towards the common goal that we are looking for in as far as achieving economic, in as far as achieving full integration. But I also want to highlight that for the African Union and ECOWAS itself and other regional economic blocs, it is important that we concord efforts towards ensuring that we do not have more countries leaving these blocs, because for example, the more we have disunity, the more countries are breaking off, the more we are having fragmentation, the more we are having more more regional blocs being formed. For instance, now the Sahel states that emanated from the ECOWAS of 3 countries, we realize that we are always, Africans, we can only be defined by our strength, and our strength can only be in numbers. So if we have a regional economic bloc that comprises of 15 countries, and now we have the Alliance of Sahel State with 3 countries, realize that they're going to find it more challenging in the geopolitical space of Africa and the globe. So I, for one, I believe that the African Union has a big role to play in as far as diplomatic engagements is concerned, because one would say that in order to curtail what is happening in these regions, there might be need to deploy peacekeeping forces. But as of now, I believe that the best way that we can move is through diplomatic engagements. And also, it is important to analyze the historical context of withdrawals of countries from regional economic blocs. An example is Mauritania in 2002 that left ECOWAS. And by then, the reasons that they gave were actually because their economic and trade structures were not in conformity with...
But also important to note, you understand that even ECOWAS in itself says that these three states have not been in conformity with the withdrawal process.
Yes,
because they say the withdrawal process takes approximately a year.
Yes, yeah.
And these states withdrew in a press statement.
They didn't give a notification.
Yes,
Yeah, but
So
this
you
is-
need a
yes.
notification
to withdraw, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, there are questions as to whether the withdrawal was actually lawful, given the fact that the framework of ECOWAS rather requires a one-year notice as a prerequisite to leave the regional bloc. But as I was saying earlier, that Mauritania eventually had a new associate a membership agreement with the ECOWAS, and we saw its readmission into this body. Look at countries like Morocco. Morocco left the African Union, I think, in around 1984, and by then the matters escalated over issues of territorial integrity and issues of territorial sovereignty. But in 2017, we see its readmission back into the African Union, which actually shows that it is important for countries to strike an appropriate balance between national interests and regional integration. We have our neighbors here, Tanzania, when they left COMESA, and by then there were requirements, or it had been agreed, it was unanimously agreed that there would be zero tariffs on imports, and Tanzania saw this as a threat towards its economic stability because they heavily dependent and relied so much on tariffs and finances from value-added tax. However, collectively, if we analyze and try to demystify what the consequences of the withdrawal and the reasons of the withdrawal, I believe there is hope. Not all is lost, and I believe that we can actually prevent further disintegration. We can further prevent the consequences of countries leaving regional blocs through taking the collective efforts, one from the African Union, and even the blocs themselves have a role to play. And yes, so basically that is what I think.
All right, thank you. Denise, maybe as you wrap up on the conversation relating to the exodus of those three countries and the implications it has on integration, but also future integration of Africa, kindly introduce for us the conversation. I'd like to pick your thoughts. You're someone who is interested in peace and security, and the issue, the insecurity in DRC Congo is one thing. The humanitarian crisis that the Congolese are experiencing at the moment is dire. The town of Goma is experiencing a huge humanitarian crisis. People are running away. People's livelihoods are being distorted. So as we conclude on the aspect of the conversation that we're having, introduce or pick your thoughts on the issue of Democratic Republic of the Congo.
All right. I think in all the conflicts, no one has interested themselves in what is happening to DRC. I think this is a conflict that began as early as 1996. Actually, it began as early as 1994 during the Rwanda genocide. What happened is that a number of Hutus, like close to 2 million, sought refugee within DR Congo. What that meant, they felt that there were threats on them from the Tutsi government when the RPF took over or when President Paul Kagame took over. So the Hutu sought refugee within DRC. And most of the population within the north and the south of Kivu are actually Hutu. But fast forward, in 1996 to 1997, when Mobutu Sese Seko was still the president, they accused Rwanda for interfering within DR Congo. They said that the rebels that were financed to actually kill the Hutu or the Hutu were still having threats from the Tutsi government that was led by Paul Kagame. During that conflict, over 2 million people actually lost their lives. But then fast forward, in 2022, they were having the back and forth together with the Rwandan government, together with Laurent Kabila's, Joseph Kabila's, all the presidents that took over. But then fast forward to 2022 and what escalated the conflict. But keeping in mind that DRC has the most minerals in the world, from uranium to cobalt to coal to all the minerals that would actually exist. That's why you have things like Mission in Congo, where the US troops were actually deployed within Congo to keep these people safely, or you're going to have a lot of peacekeeping missions from the East African community going to the DRC. So in 2022, what happened is that there were several attacks from M23, which M23 is made up of the Tutsi extremists, and which for far too long, all the presidents of Congo have continuously said that they're backed up by the president of Rwanda. So you find that M23, after 5 years of inactivity, they were now launching attacks in Goma, south and north of Kivu, and they were killing Hutus. But this is a country that for far too long has been destabilized. You're going to look at the ADF, how the ADF has continuously killed civilians, but has also posed threats to neighboring countries like Uganda's security. So you could see the series of attacks that we usually have in and between the year, where you have the ADF attacking maybe how it killed in 2023 the tourists, but also how they attacked the school, and all these attacks that just come from Congo being our neighboring country. So President Felix of Congo continuously said that M23 is backed up by Rwanda's government, but then too, also the US, the mission in Congo should leave Congo. All peacekeeping missions, whether it is regional or whether it is globally, was suspended. And these were his justifications. He said that one, the mission in Congo has continuously not kept what it was supposed to do. They have raped women, they have caused a humanitarian crisis, civilians are suffering, refugee camps, and these are individuals that are supposed to keep peace, but they're rather destabilizing. But then the presence of minerals within Congo have made the war in Congo to become globalized. Everyone has an interest in Congo because of the minerals it has. Whether it is China that owns the coal mines or that benefits from the coal mines, or even during Joe Biden's administration, how he continuously mentioned that Congo has managed to put China out there as one of the countries that are involved in energy, but also renewable resources. So you see that Democratic Republic of Congo is at the center of transition in renewable energy, but then also the minerals it has are supposed to be used by these individuals. 7 million out of the population are internally displaced, which of most of them are in refugee camps, and which of them need humanitarian aid, whether it is medical, whether it is food. 6.9 million people, ever since the conflict began from 1994, have died. So you see that the conflict in Congo is one we don't want to talk about, and it's almost like a genocide that exists where these individuals are being killed, and no one wants to talk about it. But then also at the center of globalization, it's one that interests global powers, because even I think Uganda cannot just construct roads in Congo, yet here in the middle of the city we don't have roads. What could be the interest?
But the argument to that is, you see, once you have infrastructure development in a situation that is less developed, there are possibilities of reduced insecurity. Case in point, look at what we have in Karamoja. Karamoja has very poor infrastructure. Imagine if you set up very good, robust roads in areas of Karamoja. Definitely insecurities will reduce. Let us look in areas in Kenyan areas where there is less development. So the idea behind Uganda constructing roads in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Is not to harness resources? It is not to harness resources, really? But rather reduce economic, the instability or insecurity in the area.
You see, Congo has
but as a wind up on this,
it's a rainforest country. It has a lot of forests, which actually mean that you're going to harbor a lot of insecurities, or which guerrilla war fighters are going to use as a hub for their own activities. But this is what I'm going to talk about. The integration, East African community still on the question of integration. I think Mark mentioned that Somalia joining the ES EAC is sort of an opportunity for it, but also to regional integration. I think there are very many questions that have come about Somalia joining the East African community, given that we are trying to deal with a crisis that is happening in Congo, but then too you still have South Sudan trying to come up from the kind of conflicts that they had. You're trying to deal with Rwanda with their infringed relations together with Uganda and Congo. Kenya, on the other hand, and Uganda are having the kind of economic wars. So you see that we have failed to deal with our problems internally,
But still,
and we are wanting to
still
expand with
want-
another country that has problems that could actually cause a threat to these countries. You look at all the Al-Shabaab attacks or anything that we are having, it's because of the AMISOM, our involvement, the UPDF troops within Somalia, because you're trying to solve the crisis in Somalia where one of the parts in Somalia wants to secede. You have Somaliland declaring itself as a country. They have their own flag, they have their own passport, but they're not recognized by the AU, they're not recognized by the UN. And that's the kind of conflict we are putting ourselves amidst, given the conflict that is happening in Congo. So the attacks that come usually there and there, ADF on the national security of these countries, Al-Shabaab in Kenya or in Uganda, you see that we need to first deal with our own internal problems before expanding. We need structures that are going to deal with this. And this is why most regional blocs are failing, because they have failed to come to a common ground of how to solve conflicts. And if it is in comparison with our discussion about ECOWAS, what Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali are doing is to set precedents and say, if regional blocs are not working for us, then we are on our own. So this is the same thing. President Felix says that we do not need any regional troops because what they are doing is just to steal our resources, our minerals, and we're not benefiting from them. That's why we have to bring in SADC. SADC troops to actually come within East African Community Affairs. So you see that whichever part of Africa, the regional blocs are either failing the citizens or they are working for the foreign influence.
All right. Mark,
Yes.
I'd also like to pick your thoughts on the insecurities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The Congo problem, I believe, needs a political solution. Because given the fact that Congo has about 85% of the world's minerals, so whoever controls Congo controls 85% of the world's minerals. That's the situation that is in Congo. Therefore, you find that the people that have interest in Congo are both regional, that means from the East African community, you have people interested. Then also continental, the SADC forces were here. Then also outside, the West also has an interest in Congo. So I believe that the Congo problem should be solved with a political solution. And the political solution would be regional integration. Although it hasn't worked properly, as she said, there are still issues to do with political fragmentation, whereby His Excellency Tshisekedi of Congo recently said that to hell with the East African Community forces, standby forces, because they were just stealing resources and what. So those are the issues, the underlying problems that will continue to be faced. However, we shouldn't give up. I believe the vision should be serious regional integration, and such issues can be solved. The only problem that is bringing about issues in the Congo right now is the political fragmentation, even within the East African community. Between Rwanda, you find that Uganda has a side, you find that Kenya has a side, you find that Tanzania has a side, and therefore, and all of them, they don't just have sides, but they want to gain from the situation. Recently, His Excellency, the President of Uganda, asked for special permission from the Congo President, Tshisekedi, His Excellency, to construct roads in the Congo. Reason being, he wanted to fight the ADF that was causing problems within the border points. But I believe that that is something that we should keep doing. Because right now, the challenge with Congo is that you realize that most of the areas where there is instability, those are forest areas, areas that you can't penetrate with military machines like tanks, okay? So if you have instability in such areas, rebels take advantage of the poor infrastructure to destabilize other regions. So I believe building and constructing of roads in such areas is a way forward, especially in terms of security. Yes.
All right. Rodney, as we try and wrap up, I would also like to pick your thoughts on the status quo in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Democratic Republic of Congo. But before I even go to that, I believe it is high time that regional economic blocs redefined their role in solving the issues of member states. Because, for example, now we are seeing an insurgency in DRC, and we are seeing its implications on, first of all, the local people, the people that actually are directly affected, the people that are being killed, people that are being displaced from their homes. But then also, when we are looking at the Congo question, we are also looking at the influence of external forces. Yes, because pertinent to note is that in the growing context of globalization, just like she mentioned, we are likely to see more foreign powers having interest in what is actually taking place in Congo.
True.
And using it and using the ongoing instability as a leverage to achieve certain given interests. But I also believe that why we are experiencing a series of why we're experiencing whatever is happening in DRC is also partly attributed to the geographical makeup of Congo. You understand that the largest proportion of Congo is comprised of forests. These are things that we studied in history in primary, where you realize that where you see very many forests, there are high chances that you're going to house rebel activities. You're going to have very many issues surrounding instability, because these are rather harboring places for these people. But then lastly, about the Congo question is that, you see, I believe that a problem anywhere is a problem everywhere. This was very evident during COVID-19, where we were discussing how COVID-19 came from China, but within a few months down the road, we are seeing that that the COVID-19 has ravaged almost the entire globe.
True.
So to sum up, I believe that the political instability and whatever is happening in DRC is actually deemed to transcend beyond its borders and extend to neighboring countries and have implication on people outside DRC. A case in point is Uganda and the saga in western Uganda. So I believe that is what I can say about Congo.
All right. In maybe 30 seconds, you can give us your parting shots and concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much once again for hosting me on this show, but as well for your deliberate efforts in expanding the civic space and availing an opportunity for the youth like me to come out and air and have these conversations. And I also encourage the viewers out there, our dear viewers out there, that it is important for us as the youth to interest ourselves in current affairs and the politics. It is important for us to take part, because we are the next generation. So we can decide to either break or build the future. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Break or build the future. Mark.
Yes, thank you so much for this platform. And as I conclude, because I talk as a Pan-Africanist generally, I believe that for Africa to develop, the young people have to engage in active politics. Yeah. It's really a sad state of affairs that you find that many young people are not interested in politics because they believe it doesn't affect them. But believe me, it affects you. as I said earlier, if you are not on the table, at the top of the table for deciding economy, then you're on the what? You're on the menu for eating. So we must have the love to take part in politics, and most especially developmental politics, not politics of tribal lines, not politics of religious lines. So yeah, generally that's what I could say. And lastly, the goal is one. We need a United States of Africa.
As a Pan-Africanist.
As a Pan-Africanist, we need a United States of Africa. That's one country, one president, one currency, one reserve bank, and one military.
All right.
It's hard to get there, but
it's possible.
it is possible.
I like your optimism.
In the long term.
Yeah, in the long term.
Really, there's something I wanted us to discuss, but due to time constraints, African Union not having even a bank that supplies African countries with.
See, those are the issues.
Anyway, it's something we shall maybe have another time. But Denise, in 30 seconds.
All right. Thank you so much for always having me. It's always a pleasure. And well, to all the Africans out there and to everyone else watching this show, I think it's time we set in motion one that is going to reverse the damage that was caused by the initial coup plotters. The first coup plotters were actually those who divided Africa, caused the borders, and that was like in November 1884. That was the very first coup to take place for Africans. So any development or any mechanisms that can be done to undo the damage that was caused then is what we need. That's Ubuntu. I am because you are. Pan-Africanism, to make sure we have our identity back and to make sure we pride ourselves in what identity we have. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. You've heard it there from the panelists. It's been a very thrilling and interesting conversation. For the young people out there, you need to definitely interest yourselves in matters relating to current state of affairs, but also international politics, because we are the leaders of now, so we must be interested in this for us to have a better country, a better continent, and a better world. Otherwise, my name is Douglas Drake. I've been your host for today's conversation. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.